everyone. Hello, I'm very happy to be here with you today and talk about a topic that I've been obsessed with for a lot of time working on product, and I hope it will inspire you, making your product experience unique. Let's get started. But before we dive into some geeky stuff, I'm gonna take a step on the side and talk to you about the story of Sylvie. So Sylvie Guillem, she's arguably the best classic dancer of all time, at least she is to me. To tell you a bit about her background, she's starting doing classic dance at the age of 13, and she became the principal dancer, like danseuse étoile, at the Paris Opera at the age of 19. So it's like a lightning-fast progression in her career. And on this picture behind me, she's dancing the Act 3 of Raimonda, which is a very, very difficult piece, technically speaking. On the dance level, it's like this, you know. But in the audience, when you watch her, and I really encourage you to watch the video, you don't see any effort. The only thing you see is the moves, the music. Well, I mean, you're just captivated by the show and by the emotions that the show is providing to you. Yet I'm pretty sure that to reach that level, Sylvie spent hours rehearsing, hours working on her technique, you know. But she spent those hours just to forget about them. When she's on stage, this is not what you see. This is a parallel to me because I believe that we have reached that moment in software products when emotions are actually more important than technique. And it's actually, if you think about it, kind of the normal learning curve and process for any discipline where you have to master a technique. First of all, you're going to try to really master that technique. So being, like for instance, talking about product, making sure that your page is loading very fast, that you don't have any UX problem, etc. And then you're going to forget about that technique and just let the real emotions flow, you know. And so I really think that this was true individually for a dancer like Sylvie Guillem, but this is true now collectively on the stage where we are at, with the software product. So let's deep dive a bit on how we got there. Basically, we can say that we've followed 3 stages there. First of all, and back maybe 20 years ago, it was all about, again, just basic UX. So how can I have my page loading fast? How can I make just a secure transaction on the web? It seems so trivial right now, but remember, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of people were very afraid of that, you know. We created new disciplines like UX. It did not exist 20 years ago. So that was the first stage. Very hard, you know, to pass, but the stage just after, it's frictionless. So now that you master these like basic elements, you know, you're going to work on having something that don't drive the attention out of the show. Talking about Sylvie again. So you're going to have something that is super smooth in the UX, something that is very efficient. That's the second step. It's not so easy here, again, because the standards are also getting higher, you know. It's not something linear. It's like the expectations you have, for instance, in terms of page loading, it keeps increasing. So this is also something that is a constant battle, again, not to drive the attention away from your product. But I believe the last stage is where we are right now, is the stage of emotions. And this is what's going to make successful products from now and moving forward. Let's take an example. And I'm going to name, like here, illustrate my point with the travel industry. Yes, I'm being a bit polemic here, but let me explain. I'm being a bit severe with Connect. I don't think this is poor UX, strictly speaking, but I don't think it's frictionless either, you know. When it's about using this app, and I'm a heavy user, for instance, I'm constantly a bit irritating by some stuff, you know. For instance, I travel a lot with the trains with my 2 daughters, but each time I book a train, the first thing I'm being asked is if I want to add a pet to my travel. No, I don't want to. So this is the kind of little things that, again, irritates me a little bit, makes me want to drop, and makes it not such a frictionless experience. The stage above, frictionless, for me, Booking.com kind of embodies a good illustration for that. Booking, I mean, they spent, I'm pretty sure, like months, years of A/B testing, making sure everything is extremely efficient, mastering the conversion rate. And that makes something that, again, if you enter that funnel, they're going to work very, very hard on you finishing that funnel and actually converting. So that's really, for me, a good illustration of frictionless. But you have the stage above, emotions. And for me, that's the level where Airbnb is right now. And let's zoom in into it, because these guys are really a masterpiece here. Airbnb have two values, North Star value. I will touch base a bit more later on the concept of North Star value. But basically, this is the perception they want to give you as a user when you're browsing their product, when you're browsing their app. And those values are flexibility and dream, which they actually recently added. How do you convey that perception? I mean, this is basically everywhere in the experience, starting with the first element, the search bar. The search bar starts saying, I'm free to travel everywhere, anywhere. That's the first word you see. If you click on that and you open the search menu, you will see, I'm flexible. I can travel anytime. So you're really in this atmosphere of saying, yeah, I can do anything with this app, with this product. And very recently, they've added those categories that you see just below the search bar, which are like super unique to their industry, but super unique to Airbnb itself. You know, they really came up with those categories. But they did not just roll these categories out, you know. No, they waited a lot. They created a whole story about that. And this is when Brian came into place. So this is Brian Chesky. He's the CEO of Airbnb and the founder. So Brian, you know, set himself in a video explaining why this is such important for Airbnb to come up with those categories. Imagine that, you know, of course, Airbnb is a company mastering a lot of tech, you know, being extremely good, I imagine, in terms of product rollouts, the ability to go to prod many times a day. They just did not decide to roll out categories like that. They paused, they waited, they created a whole narrative about it, they recorded their CEO telling about it, and they rolled out the product, you know. And actually, they do that twice a year now. They have two releases of their product twice a year. Very much orchestrated. Why? Because the idea of Brian, I imagine, is to say that the narrative around your product is as important as the feature itself. So don't go waste your product not thinking about the narrative before. And so this is what he did, and this is super powerful. It's basically a life cycle, like a value chain saying, you have your North Star value, you build your narrative, you build your features, and you trigger the emotions around that. And the last step, because it doesn't stop there, is that you create memorization. That's the end goal. That's the end game. Why? Because this is the business impact. So basically, Airbnb has this like 90% direct traffic. I'm super jealous of those numbers. And they recently released their financials. They've managed to have a 70% year-over-year growth in revenue. So it's actually higher than pre-COVID period. This, to me, is like a great example of mastering and how you can leverage, again, the emotions around your product to have a big business impact. A little pause on why it matters with some factual elements. 54 seconds, that's the average time spent on a web page on any industry, B2C, B2B, you name it. That's the average time spent of a user on a web page. On top of that, 50% of users will only see one page of your experience. They will bounce after watching just one page. And the last piece of element here is that 1 out of 2 users are returning users. So your questions that you should keep asking yourself is, how do I make sure they come back to my website, to my app, to my product, and not to the one of the competitor, you know? So how can I make sure that people memorized my product and are willing to come back to it? That's really the question that we should all have in mind. Another illustration of a company that kind of does a great job here, for me, is Spotify. So the North Star value of Spotify is discovery. It's actually interesting because it was not necessarily the case a few years back. If you remember, at one point, when, like Spotify must be like a 10-year-old company, and for probably the first 5 years, their promise, their North Star value was more about access. Access meaning, like, I have a tremendously big catalog, and I want people to feel that they can have access to unlimited music. And if you remember Spotify back in the years, you just had like a big search bar, and you have like a long list of music. Yeah, so I can scroll, I can have access to all this music, and I can search what I want. But they did that turning point. They changed their approach, they changed their North Star value, saying, no, this is discovery that matters, and this is a deliberate choice. That had big impacts on the product and on the experience. And let me show you a few examples to that. This is Mozart. This is not just Mozart. This is an album entirely created by Spotify based on all the listening data they have. So they're able to say and to tell me as the user, this is the best way for you to discover Mozart. And I built that for you based, again, on all the data that I have. So the emotion that I have here is around trust, is around saying, yes, okay, I'm going to play that game, Spotify. I'm going to try and listen to those tunes that you combine together because I trust you in this discovery process. And that's super important because another great element that Spotify came up with is, of course, personalization. That is extremely important to make your product unique. But This is Mozart, the album, this is not personalization. This is really something about gathering all the knowledge they have about listening data. On the personalization side, obviously, this is extremely important, and they, again, had turning points in their experience and in their development of their product. Here I put a screenshot of the time capsule. I'm sure you all came across this. We can also name, for instance, your year in review. That is something that makes the experience extremely personal. So, of course, I'm going to be attached to something that talks to me and that has been built for me. But I also want to recognize, to acknowledge that personalization is not so trivial to achieve. You need a lot of data, you need a lot of knowledge around leveraging well this data, so it's not so easy. Yet, there are other ways, maybe easier, with which you can create this kind of emotions and personalization. And this is more the screenshot that you see on the left. Recently, you know, the playlist is like kind of the super core feature of Spotify. They came up with something new, maybe like a year ago, extremely simple, the ability for you to upload a thumbnail, personal thumbnail on your playlists. So with my 2 daughters, I listen to a lot of music, and I was so happy to be able to upload the picture of Juliette, because each time I open the app and browse, I see like very famous artists. And in the middle of like Drake, Kendrick Lamar, I see Juliette. And that's always this little emotion that I get, you know, from seeing that, which makes me like the product and be loyal to it. So to summarize this first part, good products, they answer the user's problem. This is frictionless, and this is extremely important. But great products, they do that. They answer the user's problem, but they do that step ahead, and they create emotional bond with the users. Let's dig into a little bit more of a practical side of things. Now that we've seen the theory, now that we've seen great examples from like super apps in the industry, I want to give you a bit more details on like how can I do that on my own, and how can I do that working on my product. And I'm going to name a lot of examples that we use at BackMarket. First, I want to touch base on this notion of the North Star value, which I explained a bit before. North Star value of Airbnb, flexibility and dream, and of Spotify discovery. So what is a North Star value? I'm sure you all here are super familiar with North Star metric, which is the metric that you use to measure the impact of your product. So the North Star value can be defined as the value that you use to build your narrative. So it's essentially the perception you want to give to your users. And it is what you want them to memorize during those 54 seconds of attention that they will give to you. A few tips about how to build your own North Star value. Here is the checklist that you can follow. First one, your North Star value needs to be consistent over time. So it has to stick over time. This is not something you can change every 6 months. You know, it has to last. It has to be something that you build upon, because it will take time, actually, to build upon it. Second tip, it has to apply to your whole product. So for instance, at BackMarket, we're a marketplace, so it has to work both for the users, for the clients, and for the sellers. Third tip, it has to trigger emotions, right? That's kind of the point of all of it. First one, it has to be shared at company level. Why is it super important? It cannot be just something for the product team. It has to be shared at company level, obviously because it will involve a lot your marketing team, your brand team, your comms team. You need to be really all together building that value for your users. And the last one, it has to be consistent in and out. So it has, again, to be something that the people working in your company feel and understand on their everyday life, because they're the best person and they're the best position to then work on this value and provide it to their users. So it has to be consistent in and out. This is the North Star value we use at BackMarket, sabotage. I'm going to pause a little bit and tell you a bit more about the background of BackMarket. So we are the leading marketplace selling refurbished device. And basically our mission is to say there's no factual reasons for anyone to buy a new electronic device. Why? What is behind this promise? It's because the quality will be here, so you're not degrading your expectations by buying refurbished, and we'll have, again, some warranties, insurance, quality metrics to make sure the experience is good. Second, it's going to be more affordable, obviously. And the third one is maybe the most important. It's going to lower very much your environmental impacts. So buying a refurbished device means you produce minus 90% of CO2 emission. It will mean that you're saving more than 60,000 liters of water, and that you will save like the equivalent of more than 300 kilos of e-waste, electronic waste. So your environmental impact is real and tangible. Now, based on these missions, there will be many ways to try to convey that, to convey the message to the users, to the clients. The one value that we chose at BackMarket, and actually that was defined back in the days, 7 years ago, and it's still there, we stick to it, is sabotage. So what's behind sabotage? It's the fact that we want to take market share out of new. So we want to sabotage the market of new. This is how we kind of interpret that on the product side. Sabotage means this little emotion of transgression, I'm going to do something a bit edgy. I'm going to be kind of a pirate. I'm going to do something that is, again, off the track, and I'm going to get a guilty pleasure out of it. For us, it means, for instance, being absolutely okay to break some e-commerce codes. Allow us to do that, again, to trigger that emotion and say, like, this is the way we're going to do it at BackMarket. The second element behind sabotage that we leverage, again, on the product experience, is this notion of belonging to a community. You're not just here sabotaging on your own, You're part of a club, of a group who does that, And that's basically the framework that we use to convey this value of sabotage and the emotions behind on the experience. With, again, always the idea that it's done so that you memorize us and you come back to us. Some illustration for that. So on the right side, you see the home screen, the home page of BackMarket. And one, of course, big element we leverage in order to work on our sabotage value is the copy, the content design. So we have a great team of content designer, and they work a lot on making it a systematic approach. So you see here, you have, of course, the big banner, size doesn't matter. I mean, would you see that on Amazon? Probably not, right? You see that on BackMarket. That's that little transgression again. Then you have all the subtitles. It's a bit small. So for instance, on the iPad, the subtitle says, distract your kid for yourself, or yourself, Googled more often than Muhammad Ali, stuff like that, So the idea here is to say, it's not just one piece of copy somewhere, it's systematic. So it really immerses you in this kind of environment saying, okay, the tone is special, but the tone is consistent everywhere. Another piece of example of like how we allow ourselves to break the e-commerce codes. You can see it with the other screenshots. So it was during the confinement. We came up with the idea of adding a payment method which was toilet paper. So it was out of stock, obviously, during that time. And again, a little illustration of how we allow ourselves to break the codes in order to create a memorable experience. Two more illustrations here. On the right-hand side, you see something that we created during a special day a few months back, which was Earth Day. So in the checkout process in the app, we were basically sending you a last message, a last pop-up, asking you, are you sure you want to buy this product? So we were, of course, inspired by Patagonia, who did that. But Patagonia, they did that on billboards. We did that in the core of our experience. So again, with the risk of like maybe damaging our conversion rate. But for us, it was more important to, again, convey the message, convey the tone of voice, saying like, we are here to make you wonder about your consumption, how you consume electronic device. And that goes just beyond buying refurbished. It's also about buying, point. So we came up with this pop-up saying like, do you really need it? Yes, let's go for it, or no, and send me a reminder. Another example that you see on the left, this is actually the core of the experience because this is the product page. So this is where you have the configurator to find the right product for you. Here, if you select the right elements, you might find by yourself the cheapest product here. And at this point, we will trigger a little animation to say, hey, congrats, you found the best deal. We do that because we love hiding stuff. Hiding stuff means, again, you're part of that club, you're part of that community. We will trigger that little emotion for you, a little ego trip saying, good job, you found it, So we love to hide stuff. You can see a lot of surprises like that. You can see hidden stuff in the footer, for instance. You will have a link to Nana Mouskouri. So I'm not sure how many of you know Nana Mouskouri, but like she's a singer that we love at BackMarket, so we want also to convey this information and this emotion to you. The last piece is putting your North Star in action. So now that you define your North Star, how do you use that every day? How do you use that in your organization? So two elements here. First, it has to be embedded in your discovery process. And the second part is it has to, like the product and comms organizations need to work very closely together. So let me explain a bit about the discovery process. I'm not going to tell you how the discovery process works at BackMarket. This would be another talk, and actually you will have some great talks about that today, so I encourage you to attend to them. I will just explain to you how we use our North Star value and the emotions within the discovery process. So we are using 3 steps, basically, setting the foundations, building the dream, and crafting for takeoff. And I will zoom in on building the dream. Building the dream is where the teams should think about the big picture, like how do we want to build that product in the long term, and after that they will go back to reality and craft an MVP. During these phases, they are required to do some like classic stuff, for instance, an elevator pitch. But we twist that elevator pitch so that people think about differentiation. People think about their North Star value and try to make their product unique. So you see here, beginning is very classic, but the last sentence is, and this baby is sabotage, because, so what I want to say here is that if the product people, if your team working on a product don't even ask themselves this question, there's no chance it happens in the end, or very little chance. So it has to be really embedded in the discovery process, like very early in the development of a product, basically. And last, making the teams like brand and comms teams and product organization work very closely together. I mean, in my experience, this is not necessarily something that is very mainstream. I haven't seen a lot of brand and product organization work super closely together. my interpretation of that is that most of the time communication teams, they don't need tech, actually. Yet, I think this is a big mistake because, again, when your product is a software product, this is the best stage to convey your message, you know. So I'm going to explain something where actually we were not that good at BackMarket and tell you how we're going to adjust moving forward. So recently, we came up with a great communication campaign, you might have seen it, that is called High Tech, Low Impact, really leveraging this data I was mentioning before to explain the environmental impact of buying refurbished. So you had, again, billboards everywhere, a lot of animations, activations, great success, great campaign. On the product side, basically you had nothing. Because we did not synchronize a lot, you know, we didn't really work together on building, orchestrating a big narrative from the campaign to the product and push that together, the way Brian Chesky orchestrated that at Airbnb. So it will come, so these are like a preview of how you will see those data moving forward on the product page, so really again on the core of the product. But the miss here is that we should have synchronized better, you know, and really combine our effort for a bigger impact. Lesson learned, so you will probably see very soon another campaign, and it will be more, again, orchestrated and more synchronized between our teams. This is super important, again, not necessarily coming naturally, so it has to come from an intention to working together and to, like, again, convey emotions to the users. So that's it for me. I really want to thank you for your attention, and happy to get questions from you now.
Thank you so much, Amandine. Really cool talk. We have many questions from you guys and girls, so I'm going to have to prioritize. This is a product conference, so perfect. We have several people asking you about international, basically, and how emotions are not necessarily perceived the same in different markets. Yep. Elina thinks that transgression works in France, but maybe not in Germany. I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's an excellent question. So we ask ourselves this question all the time because BackMarket operates in 16 countries. So you have a very different approach to, like, you have different cultures, basically. The way we answer that, it's not an easy question, but I guess the first thing we try to do when we answer this question is hire local people working on the content, on the copy, you know. So that's one effort, but this is something that is extremely valuable. So we have content designers in the US, based in the US, US native, the same for Germany, the same for France, etc., etc. That's the basic. Because these people, you need to build the message with them. They need to, to really align and understand the value to interpret it and translate it in their local languages and in the local culture. This is always like about finding the right position, you know. It has a big strength, honestly, to be consistent. So to keep just one value, not to try to customize it too much. It's very powerful. It's like it scales, basically. Yet it needs to have this little room around customization, and I think that takes place at the copy level, actually. You don't have to say size doesn't matter in German, for instance. Yet you can provide this tone of voice that is special.
Thank you. We have another question about sabotage, that value. How did you come up with this value at BackMarket?
Yes, that's a good question. Actually, I think it comes directly from the founders. So there are 3 founders at BackMarket. One is the CEO, one is the CTO, and one is the Chief Culture and Communication Officer. So the fact that from day one, there has been someone with that background and thinking about the brand, thinking about how it expresses, I guess that explains a lot. It has been important to the company from day one, and it has been built over time, you know. And the way they built that together, they're all aligned on this, again, since the beginning, so I think that makes a big difference. And then, I think those guys have creative minds, like simply speaking. They know it's important, they think it's important. They could have different ways to do it. They chose it for me, again, what's very important is that they stick to it, and it's something that you live in the culture internally, and that we want to express from the outside.
Great. We have 42 upvotes for this one, so it's a big one. It's a tough one, actually.
Okay.
So basically, the question is, it might be easier to build this kind of narrative for B2C product. What about B2B? How to create it when it's a SaaS product, not so sexy, for example?
Yeah. I expected that question. I think it's a very interesting one. Building emotions doesn't mean it has to be fun. It's really not the point, you know. It's about having a value, and that value differentiates you from a competitor. So I guess this is something that works for B2B too. It's not about building that little joke, you know. It's something much more rooted in how do I want to differentiate my approach, my product, how I want to be unique. That works for B2B, obviously, you know. Maybe I can touch base a little bit on how we do that at BackMarket, because we have a B2B side of things too, you know. We work with sellers on the marketplace. And obviously, we don't have the same way of expressing our sabotage value to them, but yet we do want to differentiate. So the way we differentiate with them, for instance, is by leveraging as much as we can, this is one example, this environmental impact. You're a seller on BackMarket, you're making business with us. Obviously, that's the most important point to you. But we also build a partnership with you, saying we're part of the same boat, we are part of the same team building an impact and reducing CO2 emission, for instance. So as a seller, we want you to know that you will have this impact by selling a refurbished product individually as a seller, collectively with all the community of sellers, and even more collectively as a BackMarket platform. So this is one example. Another example, for instance, that we've recently changed, something that is extremely important in our system is quality of refurbished, because that builds trust with the users. So that's a standard we apply to our sellers. So if you don't apply to the quality standards, you're not allowed to sell, basically. The quality charter used to be like a 70-page Word document, extremely difficult to understand. We've recently reshaped it, again, redesigned it, spent time on it, spent time on the content. Like, this is a great playground to put a lot of brand, a lot of message, you know, and this sense of partnership. We're building that together. We are taking market share out of new together. So that's some illustrations of how we do that on the seller side. Yes, it's maybe a challenge, but it works for both sides, and we want to make sure it's consistent.
Awesome, thank you. You showed us this example of Earth Day, which is really cool and bold. So we have several people asking what was the result actually in terms of conversion rate, drop-off, business metrics.
Yes. So we pushed that pop-up in the checkout funnel for 1 day. During Earth Day, we monitored a lot, obviously, what was going on. It did not impact the conversion rate. So it was neutral. That was great. You know, obviously, we were ready to take the risk because we pushed it to prod, you know. That was a good learning. It did not decrease the conversion rate during the experiment. It's harder, of course, to measure the impact on brand attachment, you know. It was, for this matter, it was part of a more global activation. We did Hack Market the same day. I don't know if you came up with this activation on the com side, but basically we hacked Apple stores in several places in Europe, sending airdrop messages to the people who were like checking out new devices. We were sending a message from BackMarket saying, hey, are you sure you want to do that? Go on and download our app if you want to know more. So it was actually a combined activation that day. The overall results of that day was fantastic. We got a lot of feedbacks, positive ones from users. We didn't get sued by Apple, which was a great news too. And overall, we were very pleased with the experience. Obviously, for us, it's just a step one, because in the pillar of like refurbished, there is this whole notion of circular economy. So maybe at one point, instead of telling you, do you want to hold off with your purchase, we will ask you, do you want to repair your device, you know, instead of changing it. Do you want to trade in your current device and maybe think about buying later? This will be other value propositions, but that was actually good playground to understand the impact on metrics, which were okay.
Awesome. Maybe one last question. So you mentioned the sync between comms and brand teams and product team. Can you just tell us a bit more practically how this works?
Yes. Actually, to go beyond that, it's the way we are organized between product and the other functions of the company. We use an organization model that is called the trifecta. Actually, back to what I was describing on how BackMarket was created with the 3 founders, it's just mimicking that same setup moving forward in the way our organization scales. So you have, again, the CEO, the CTO, and the creative guy, the product guy, I would say. And those 3 people, actually, we mimic that in the way our organization scales. So we have trifecta. Trifecta means product, engineering, and business. And this is really a team. This is not stakeholder management. If there is one word that I hate, it's stakeholder. This is a team. So they work together. They rely on their vision. They have rituals. Of course, they have roles, so they don't do all the same things together at the same time, but they are part of the team. And this is the model we use working for all the marketplace elements, all the touch points of the marketplace on the product side. So you have that for sellers, and then the business side is more like business developers and the supply team. You have that on the customer side, obviously, and here we have the business represented by communication. In some areas, in some touch points, for some feature teams, this is in the trifecta, communication is the business part of the trifecta, the business head of the team.